Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com, and it is time for another news roundup episode of the podcast. This episode is sponsored by Provence. Did you know Dynamics 365 is the ideal platform for IT service management? Powered by Dynamics 365, Provence ITSM leverages Dynamics' rich capabilities to provide modern, flexible, and cost-effective IT services. Support a digital transformation in IT with Provence ITSM, the most Microsoft-centric IT service management product on the market. For more information, visit provence.com. That's PROVANCE.com. So let's get into it. I am joined today by MS Dynamics World Assistant Editor, Eamon McCarthy-Earls. Hey, Eamon, welcome.
Hi, Jason. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you once again. We have a lot to get through today. We'll try to make it move swiftly, as you might say. And I thought we'd just jump right in with something that caught my eye just today, a new announcement by Microsoft that they have acquired a firm called ADRM Software, large-scale industry-specific data model developer, I guess you would say. Probably one of the most wonkish and most opaque kind of company acquisitions I've seen Microsoft do in a while. ADRM has 75 industry vertical schemas. Microsoft says the primary use for this company's IP, at least, and probably their expertise is in Azure in creating intelligent data lakes that can represent lines of business that can be more easily harmonized together. Presumably, this is also something that Microsoft can sort of put forward to companies across its most high-value verticals that's far more in-depth and far more, I guess, comprehensive than anything they've been able to do on their own until now. Obviously, they have several verticals that they're most focused on. I think these schemas probably, many of them fit into those primary strategic industries that Microsoft focus on, but with a lot finer detail, different specific types of insurance, specific life sciences areas, specific manufacturing, or distribution, or other industries, government perhaps. I mean, there are a lot of them there, and I think that's really ADRM's bread and butter. If you take a look at their website, I don't know if it's changed or not since Microsoft made the announcement, but it's, as I said, the word opaque comes to mind. They have clearly a lot of knowledge, and what they seem to sell is that expertise. So it remains to be seen a little bit how Microsoft is really going to take advantage of this, whether it really is mostly on the Azure data lake side for some of these really complex data models for full-scale application development and cloud architecture, or whether it's also going to filter down into the business application space. We're going to talk about this a little more in a few minutes, but obviously Microsoft's sort of business applications teams also develop industry vertical accelerators and solutions that they try to, use to go to market with or to help their partners. Will some of these ADRM models fit into that as well? I think it remains to be seen, but certainly an interesting, bit of news today that's worth looking at a little bit more. When you talk about acquisitions, you're also talking about the fact that Microsoft still has, a very healthy cash cushion that it sits on, and it's going to continue to make the kinds of acquisitions that I think it always has. And that kind of leads into maybe how the company's doing financially, right?
That's right, Jason. I think one of the things that's been very interesting with this very, very bizarre set of circumstances in 2020 with the COVID-19 pandemic, Microsoft overall has performed very well in a market where many companies are in dire straits right now. Exactly like you said, it's able to actually do acquisitions right now. And we actually got some insight into that with the Q3 2020 earnings and revenue announcement. Essentially, Microsoft brought in $35 billion of revenue during that time, net income of $10.8 billion, and earnings of about $1.40 a share, which ended up beating a lot of its estimates. And I think a lot of that growth has really been driven by companies switching to Azure and companies also finishing up, implementations of Dynamics 365 and services and products around that, which has really had a sustaining effect for many organizations within the channel that we focus on. Although certainly some partners and ISVs have faced some very, very difficult times, particularly if they focus on hard-hit verticals like airlines or sports and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that stood out in that earnings announcement was the quote minimal net impact on total company revenue. And I think what that suggests to me is that they did see, like you said, real growth in certain areas. Perhaps Teams is one. I'm sure some Azure consumption and cloud migration that happened in a hurry. And maybe shifting resources toward that. I also get the sense that this is anecdotal, but what I kept hearing again and again since coronavirus really took hold around the world is companies were seeing through their existing projects, but were perhaps the big risk is companies, the big risk in the sense of partners was the companies were postponing new projects rather than just shutting down existing ones. So, I think we're into sort of a quarter with more uncertainty. I don't see that Microsoft has changed its guidance at all for the next quarter, but I think there's definitely areas of growth, but also areas of slowdown in different segments of Microsoft's sort of financial picture, and I think that remains to be seen for next quarter as well. But I think the company certainly seems to be in a much healthier position than firms in industries like airline or some of the other fluctuating industries or energy, obviously, retail, so it's really I think seen to be in a strong position. I think its stock price really reflects that too. So yeah, that was the Q3 2020 earnings from Microsoft. And next we're coming in on the end of their fiscal year. So I think we have their full year 2020 report up, Q4 and full year due in the next round in a couple months. So I wanted to turn our attention toward a few topics that happened in the Dynamics 365 SMB ERP space, and maybe a little broader, but really in the Dynamics 365 area. We had a few recent developments there. I think one that's worth noting first is, so the new GM for Dynamics 365 Business Central was sort of formally introduced, I guess you would say. His name's Mike Morton. He's a real Microsoft veteran, been with the company 24 years, I believe, and some high profile sort of software management roles, overseeing. He was on the original SharePoint team. He was overseeing some very high-profile development projects over the years. He's been on the Office team as well, so he really knows his way around Microsoft. But he's sort of new to the business application space. Really, he was kind of introduced by for everyone at the Business Central virtual event that took place recently. Introduced by Mike Ehrenberg as the new GM. In truth, he'd been in the role, I think, since as early as February, perhaps. He was certainly, like, if you check his LinkedIn, you can see that he was commenting on sort of Business Central related stuff in March, even though, and I think he actually made an appearance on a presentation very quietly without any sort of fanfare at the Business Application Summit virtual event, which was, I think, a month before the Business Central virtual event. So he was sort of there if you were paying attention. I missed that. I think no one else really talked about it either that I heard about. So this was sort of his sort of introduction, even though I think he's had a couple months to get up to speed. Didn't make a real impression, I would say, at that Business Central virtual event. He spoke for a few minutes. He, sort of put a little bit of positioning on how he sees the space. Nothing that he said really indicated any change. He didn't indicate he was really set to make a mark in any sort of major way, at least for the moment, in anything that he said there. Presented his material in a friendly, sort of neutral way, and didn't give a lot of hints about what might be to come other than the status quo. That was my personal take on it, and that was a little bit of the impression I got talking to a few other people in the channel as well. But obviously a big move. It's been more than a year, almost a year now, or somewhere around there since Business Central had sort of a dedicated general manager in Marco Perisic, who left the company, obviously, and Mike Ehrenberg has been filling in very ably since then. But he's obviously not just considered someone dedicated to Business Central. So it'll be very interesting to see how Mike Morton sort of takes the reins of this product, which is all, it's one of these things that has like huge potential. You think about the entire SMB ERP sort of customer base kind of falling under him now. I would think between NAV, GP, SL, and Business Central itself.
Well, speaking of Business Central, actually, for our listeners today, could you fill them in on some of the changes we've seen around a sort of a new plan, new SKU for D365 Business Central, as well as some of the shifts related to plan purchase options? that you had a chance to write about recently?
Yeah, there have been a few of these. It certainly has partners talking, and I think customers hopefully are paying attention as well. So there's a new SKU for data storage, like you mentioned. That's something that's pretty important because a lot of legacy nav customers have a lot more data than is typically able to fit into a standard Business Central SaaS data allotment. I guess you would say it's 80 gigs, and there really wasn't. There was sort of a limit before. Now you can at least buy more, although I think it's fairly pricey. So my guess is this is an offer, the ability to buy extra data storage or something that will continue to evolve. I think the pricing, as I understand it, some partners say it's kind of a non-starter. I think others are okay with it. And I think each customer is going to evaluate that themselves when they look at the true cost of moving to Business Central, whether they're coming from Nav or whether they're a new customer, understanding how much data they really want to store. And Microsoft's trying to mitigate as well with some technical improvements of data compression and sort of minimizing log storage and other things like that to make it more efficient. But I think this is going to be an ongoing discussion to figure out who's really right for a cloud Business Central system and how you operate with this sort of limited database storage and the extra costs associated with growing that storage. And then, like you said, on the other hand, there was, or I guess related, there was this new enhancement plan purchase option. This is really kind of still breaking news, I guess you would say. Different partners. I wrote about it. I got some input from some partners and shared that. But a lot of different viewpoints on what this really means. So it's a new incentive to get and it's something that partners, I think, really, really are happy about, which is the idea of getting SMB on-prem ERP customers, GP Nav SL, off of the traditional enhancement plans and into the CSP model, which means they're purchasing through CSP. Partners get, the margins of CSP. The real questions come in the math of it and the unintended consequences of some of the discounts that are involved. If you're a customer and you're looking at this, you really want to run the numbers with your partner. I think partners, as time goes on, will have a much better sense of sort of what the benefits are for various customers, depending on how much they pay for their enhancement plan today on-prem on an annual basis, what it'll look like in the CSP model, and what kind of savings they would get in terms of transitioning. Because part of this is all about transitioning to Business Central. So what kind of savings they would get by using this offer to transition to Business Central in the cloud. So yeah, I think it's one of those scenarios where different customers will have different results and after they sort of run through some what if scenarios and do some calculations about what it really means for them.
And I know one other topic that I found really intriguing that you had a chance to write about, among several actually, is the new web API for Power Apps portals and what's kind of coming out in public preview from Microsoft with that.
Yeah, this was a bit of a smaller announcement. I got wind of it thanks to Nick Haydick of Engineered Code. He does a monthly Power Apps portal sort of community call webcast with us. And last month he did reveal just a little bit that Microsoft sort of allowed him to talk about sort of an upcoming feature, which is this web API for portals. And this is important really kind of for technical reasons, but it's a new way to make it possible to do create, read, update, delete operations on data in your common data service from the sort of portals interface and to do it dynamically. So it's really the ability to, free developers from the older model, which was this liquid development language, which was more restrictive. And instead they can use JavaScript, which is a much, more dynamic and sort of freeing, language for to use in the context of building out a portal interface. So not a whole, you can look at the article to kind of get the description, but they're kind of doing a very careful and sort of step-by-step deployment of some of these features. And there's obviously some care that goes into the security of it and, some of the restrictions on who can sort of use these these APIs. So yeah, it was very interesting. Nick was certainly excited about it. I think a lot of people in the portals space have been waiting for this, so it was certainly worth noting.
We've also seen a variety of new insurance models coming to the common data model, particularly aimed for property and casualty as well as life insurance scenarios. Things like figuring out policy documents, policy terms, coverage, and that kind of thing. So it's an interesting sort of refashioning of D365 along the lines of the financial services accelerator, sort of looking at Power BI dashboards and common data model.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how Microsoft sort of approaches these different industry opportunities at different levels. So like you said, this this insurance model really is related to common data service and the common data model, I guess you'd say, and really focuses on building applications within that context. But then on the other hand, and then another thing that happened was, in the healthcare segment, there's this healthcare, Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare sort of solution offering, which, incorporates some business application stuff, but it goes broader with Microsoft Cloud offerings. And it's almost like they're bundling some Dynamics 365 or Power Platform stuff with some Azure capabilities and some sort of Microsoft 365 capabilities as well. And they're trying to sort of bundle it together. It's a little undefined, I felt. We'll probably see more about that in the future of how they plan to sort of make that a cohesive thing. And then at the far sort of high end, you have, again, going back to something like ADRM and sort of their sort of super high level comprehensive industry models that apparently fit into Azure Data Lake and data management strategy at the vertical price point. So you see Microsoft sort of executing on this vertical stuff just to I guess bring it back to that at sort of all these different levels, and different partners and different customers are probably going to try to learn about it at whatever level sort of suits their needs at the moment.
Well, additionally, we've had a lot of great analysis pieces as well. And for sake of time, I'll invite our readers to go and check these out because they're a little bit too in-depth to plunge into in today's podcast. I've written a couple of articles recently looking at some of the impacts of COVID-19 in the Azure space. So one is a look at containing costs. And I won't give away too many details, but there's a huge variety of Azure services that can apply to this question. I also had a chance to speak with Switch Automation, which is focusing on building automation and seeing a huge sort of expansion in their business, with many businesses and buildings currently sitting empty. Additionally, I know we've had some great writing from our expert contributors, and just to call out a few of these excellent articles. One by Everett Boss looks at Dynamics 365 master planning and sort of all the in-depth aspects of that. While Stefano Tempesta, who's been a regular contributor with us, he has given us a great bit of insight into the D365 and Power Platform certification process and how to become certified. And Jason, I'll also turn over to you because I know another item sort of a more analytical bent that you had a chance to write takes a look at insurance models and apps that are coming to the D365 Financial Services Accelerator, sort of tying in with what we were just talking about a second ago.
Of Stefano Tempesta's piece. So yeah, it was a well-received article, and then it was also a very well-received webcast that he did in response. We have a recording of that. Maybe we can link to that as well, because presenting on this topic, it really was, judging by the response that we got from our readers, certifications are really an area that a lot of Microsoft professionals care about and are always sort of preparing for. It's also interesting that how the Microsoft has sort of started to unify some of those approaches. Although as I learned in Stefano's, even in his presentation, there's always a few special Microsoft wrinkles to these things. So like, for example, now there's the certification site, which I think is like, is called Learning. And then there's Microsoft Learn and Microsoft Learning now. And one is for just education and training. The other one's for certification. So, I mean, just always funny little things like that Microsoft is putting into its planning, whether intended or not, to sort of keep everyone on their toes. Other than that, I mean, just to look ahead a little bit, Eamon, I mean, we have another Power Platform community call coming up very, very shortly, actually. We have a range of new podcasts. We could probably just do a podcast rounding up past podcasts, we have conversations on solution development. We have conversations on upgrades of SMB ERP. We've talked about sort of how partners cope in the midst of the COVID crisis with serving their customers best. Really a range of things there that I would call out, and hopefully a few more planned that deal with partners, that deal with some of the upcoming product planning that and the roadmap stuff that we want to be on the lookout for. Anything else you would note for what our readers can expect?
Well, Jason, I'm very excited for a new feature that we're working on with Kirk Donahoe. Kirk had some great contributions to MSDW last summer, both coming on the podcast and writing a really interesting article for us looking at ADLS Gen 2, otherwise known to those that are uninitiated in the Azure space as Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2. And that has really evolved over the past year, and he's going to give us some insights on that in the weeks to come. Additionally, we're really fashioning a lot of our upcoming content around some of the interesting discussions going on in the Azure community. At least I am with my Azure coverage. So much more to come there.
Thank you so much, Eamon, for that and for joining me today. And that wraps up another episode of the MSDW podcast. You can reach Eamon by email, earls@msdynamicsworld.com. You can reach me by email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. Also follow us on Twitter. It's @msdynamicsworld. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World signing off.